Thank you very much for joining our webinar series, An Irish Rural Link. Over the last few weeks, we have looked at the situation in rural communities, particularly the situation affecting many of you who've joined in this morning, families, communities, and we've discovered a sort of resilience that people are very proud to be able to say that they have fought very well this situation and managed to bring about a sense of normality. And despite the new normal, which we're all hearing about, lots of people are still talking about, let's get the current normal correct. Let's make sure we don't penalize ourselves and put ourselves into such disadvantage that while we're fighting the disease, we may be allowing other factors to creep in that will create just as many problems for us in rural communities. I'm delighted this morning to be able to welcome you guests, Maura Farrell, Dr. Maura Farrell from NUIG Galway. Maura, of course, does a lot of work in the rural development, working part of the National Rural Network and Irish Rural Link, but in particular runs an extremely, lots of courses actually in the rural, but she will explain that when she comes on. I'd like to introduce you to Michael Dignan from County Offaly. Michael is County Chairman of the Offaly GAA. He was also our County Champion recently and still ongoing in the Community Call programme. So Michael, you're welcome. I'd like to welcome Anna Shakespeare. Anna has taken over the position, really easy job, Anna, of CEO of Pobal. You're very welcome, Anna. Pobal, as you know, is the largest agency in distributing funds and helping communities, particularly communities suffering from social and economic disadvantage. So you'll get lots of time to explain more about how you've managed in the crisis. And last but not least, I would like to welcome a long-time campaigner for rural development, Marion Harkin, TD. Not too long ago, it was MEP, and before that, long-time activist. Marion's experience in rural development, particularly communities affected, is long and I suppose very, very strong in its quality. Marion, you will obviously be asked lots of questions about the programme for government, and I'm sure they'll even want you to deliver some of it. But anyway, the way we do this, folks, those of you who have joined, you are also welcome. Please type in your questions under the chat button and we will take as many of them as we can throughout the conversation. And as I said, we have an hour. We will finish at 11 sharp. So may I begin? Let me begin with Michael, if you don't mind. Michael, you were out there in the field over the last few weeks. I know you mobilized quite a number, into the 1,000 at least or more volunteers in the Offaly area. And I think I've heard you talk a great deal about maybe the surprises you felt about COVID. So for you anyway, what's COVID been like?
Yeah, good morning, Seamus, and to everybody that's come on. Look, I suppose to me it's been an extraordinary period in Irish life, and you know, my life, I suppose, been in the GAA has been long and varied, but I think you become very focused on that in terms of its, you know, we talk about the volunteerism in the GAA and what it means to every community, the community-based organisation. And I suppose I've gone through the playing side of it, got into administration maybe 10 years ago in a minor club, and then got in as chairman of Offaly County Board. So I've seen all aspects of the GAA at work. But looking what's happened over the last few months, I suppose I wouldn't have been as aware of what else goes on in the community. The depth of work that goes on the community side, on the voluntary side, on the statutory side, and I suppose being community champion and being on the local authority community response forum has really opened my eyes to a lot of things. But look, I suppose on the ground, we had a good chat here before we came on, just ourselves, and it's just been the most unusual time. Everybody has been locked up at home, and you're completely isolated away from your normal day-to-day life. And what I found, I suppose, first of all, there was people out in our communities who actually knew where to go for help, or that maybe had been accessing supports in the past. But there were so many people out there that would never have had to. And the fragility, I suppose, of our lives and of everything, and we saw that even with the GEA, where in one few months we're nearly out of business financially in every other way. So I found that really interesting to look at, and then to see the response. And as you say, what I did was, as community champion, was I got the GA clubs involved, and I looked for a community liaison person in every club in Offaly, and we 41 clubs. But if I use one club or one area as an example, I think it might be better than going around. In the town of Burr, which would be a reasonable sized town, they got involved there, and what they did there was, Burr would be a town where you'd have I suppose, socio-economic widespread. You'd have all sorts of I think groups, and the GA would be seen in Burr as being very strong, but it's actually quite a small group. And they got together and they divided up the town into 15 zones with 150 houses in each zone. And they got a team of volunteers into each zone, and they got down to that sort of nitty gritty of house by house. And we had done that in our rural communities by nearly house by house. And they identified people, I'd say, that would never have come onto the radar. And just in the last week, when this, I suppose we're getting back to normal, like they did 108 grocery deliveries this week, 57 pharmacy visits, 7 lawns cut, they clean chimneys. It's just incredible in one town. And I think the way that's brought that town together has been incredible. And I think into the future, that I think Burr is going to be, despite the fact we'll have to get over an awful lot of issues, obviously, and there's going to be issues over the next number of months, but I think as a community, it's going to be very much enriched by this, the volunteers and the community response. And look, so I think it's been massive. I've met a lot of people through other agencies. I think particularly, the likes of Vincent Paul, Meals and Wheels has been a huge one in terms of the work they do and the way it's expanded in the county. And I think the challenges around keeping those services and helping those people that we've identified now, and I've talked to the council about this, that we can stay engaged with these people and make sure that people that have been identified, that the logo is nobody be left behind, but that nobody be left alone, I'd say, is probably the future one. But it's been extraordinary, really, Shams.
Absolutely. Dr. Maura Farrell, you're coming from a number of fronts in this one. What's it been like for you?
I suppose, Seamus, no more than anybody, it's been pretty difficult in one sense, and in the other sense, every day we kind of say we've had nobody sick within my own immediate family, which has been fantastic, and I think that's what we all are thankful at the end of the day. I suppose I think that maybe we've taken such a different look at our lives, at our work, at everything that we do, that, going back 3 or 4 months ago, the fact that my work had changed so much would have been hugely important. I think now we have a very different perspective on our work and on our lives, and I think we take it looking at it in a very different way. But definitely things have changed dramatically, the way we teach students, the way we look at students in the college, the way we connect with students. I think my email track that was already crazy went absolutely through the roof. So I suppose in that sense, but definitely, as Michael has said, communities coming together, people coming together. I've seen all of this happen here in my own community. I've seen it with the student body. I've seen it with the university. And I think it has, yes, of course, it has been a huge change for us all. But without a doubt, it has opened up many avenues for us. It has strengthened many communities. It has unearthed maybe a sense of volunteerism among people that may never have volunteered previously. And I think that has been a fantastic approach. Yes, I think we have found new ways of working ourselves. We found new ways of connecting with people. We've seen that you can be unbelievably innovative in what you do and how you work, and it makes you think outside the box. And I suppose, for example, a field trip that I would have taken last year with my students in Galway, out to Teagasc and out to Galway Rural Development. I'm looking at the moment of trying to do this on a virtual online field trip. So these are the kind of things that you start to think about that 6 months ago or a year ago, you wouldn't have even thought about. So I think the innovative kind of thinking that has come forward, as well as the volunteerism, for me, has been hugely noticeable. And I think that's something that we should maybe capture into the future as well.
Indeed, Maura, thank you. Anna Shakespeare, CEO of Pobble. Pobble have an enormous record going back into the 90s of working with local communities, and you've seen the development of those communities through thick and thin. Anna, did you ever think you'd see anything like this?
I don't think anybody would. The tea leaves wouldn't work for this one, I think, Seamus. And look, thanks a million for the invite to come and have this conversation this morning. As you know, Pobble is an organisation that everybody has heard of, but not necessarily understands what it is we do. So maybe it might be useful to the participants this morning to know that, you know, Pobble's role is, you know, we work on behalf of the Irish government to support communities and local agencies towards achieving social inclusion programmes, community development, and combating disadvantage. I mean, they're the primary objectives for which Pobble is established. And our job is to provide management and support services to 31 programmes in the area of social inclusion, equality, inclusive employment, enterprise, early learning and care. And last year we distributed about 800 million to local and national community-based organisations on behalf of primarily the Department of Rural and Community Development and the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. What has COVID meant to us in Pobble? So on a really practical level, you know, we have 500 employees who within a 3-week window were moved from their office spaces. All corners of Ireland were based in 12 different locations around, you know, rural and urban Ireland, and 491 of them today are working from home, and we're continuing to do our job. It was really important to us that we continue to do our job because we make sure the money keeps flowing to those community services programs. So that's the primary part of what we've done. Equally during the crisis, our part of our role was very much in supporting government to implement, you know, the community support fund, the stability scheme for national organisations, so that they could continue in business and be there for their communities when the crisis had ended. In the conversation earlier, I suppose on a very personal level, we were talking about, you know, the impact, the human impact of COVID has placed on individuals and the well-being impact. So we spoke sadly about a colleague, Seamus, that you would have known when you were on the board of Pobble, who sadly took his own life 2 weeks ago. His well-being supports were eradicated overnight, and you know, we're heartbroken in Pobble that we've lost him. But there are many communities in Ireland that are impacted by, and individuals who are impacted by that loss of that social supports, the community constructs that are there that keep us all well, keep us all connected, and you know, the value of that I don't think can be understated. And the importance of that in keeping Ireland well, keeping society well, and keeping individuals, you know, positive. So I think the importance of community is really brought to the fore. And Seamus mentioned volunteerism there, and look, one of the numbers that certainly Pobble has identified in the information that we've collated is that of the community organisations, you know, they all reported that a 21% increase in volunteer activity, which is just tremendous, that spirit of volunteerism. And really we need to ask ourselves, you know, when Rural and Community Development publish their national volunteering strategy, what we can do to bolster it, make it even more important, and support it to keep us all connected going forward, and in anticipation of what we hear might be the first or second or third wave of COVID as it comes forward, you know. So look, I'll leave it at that. Thanks,
Indeed,
Shane.
Anna, indeed. I send my sympathies. We're going to deal with the impacts of that in terms of other issues, and obviously Michael talked about the lack of sports, etc. Marion Harkin, in the middle of it all, you managed to get yourself elected. Congratulations to the Dáil, this new strange Dáil that you're in, and still no government. But Marion, from the west where you come from Sligo area, how are they coping? How is it in that county?
Well, good morning, Seamus, and to all the participants. Now, apologies, I've very poor sound here, and I'm operating off an iPhone in a hotel room in Dublin. But you were asking me about the West and how are things in Sligo and Leitrim, of course, Roscommon, yes, Donegal. But one of the first things I would say is around Sligo, Leitrim, we weren't badly hit by COVID. Yes, of course, people contracted the disease, but we weren't hit in the way other places were. You know, our nursing homes largely, though not entirely, remained free of COVID. So to some extent, Seamus, I felt that sense of fear wasn't as strong in Sligo, shall we say, or Leitrim, as it was elsewhere. Now, with a lot of older people, my own mother, for example, is 93. She'll be 94 on the 2nd of July. She lives alone, but my son went to live with her. But, you know, she was concerned, and I think a lot of older people took it very seriously because they listened to the experts, to the doctors, to the politicians, and they took it on board. But I think the sense of fear wasn't as strong there as elsewhere. But from the point of view of, you know, what's happening, I suppose as a politician, I wasn't meeting people in the way I normally do. I wasn't attending meetings, Zoom calls, yes, but it's not quite the same. People don't stop you in the street. You're walking around your local supermarket, and if there's somebody in the aisle, you wait until they're gone. If you're wearing a mask, it's important in my view, but it is a barrier. So we're not connecting, I think, at that very personal way in the way we were before. Of course, a lot of emails, telephone calls, etc. And if I look at families, I remember talking to somebody I know well who lives in North Leitrim, husband and wife, both off work, but both paid, and they have young children. And I said, this will be the most idyllic summer of those children's lives because they had both their parents, they had space, but then equally yesterday in the Dáil, we were discussing domestic violence, increased by 25%. I was listening there to Anna, she spoke, I think, about volunteering increasing by 21 or 22%. And it's pretty shocking to say that the rise in domestic violence was almost equal to that. But Seamus, I have come across real concerns about unemployment, financial stress, childcare, and you know, we are protected to some extent. There's the safety net of the COVID payment, and the harsh reality hasn't sort of hit home to people. A huge, if I was asked what's the biggest single issue, broadband connection, absence of. A little bit around access to healthcare. For me, if anybody asked me what I think will be the biggest issue, it will be non-COVID healthcare. I think, so if you add all of that, the fact that the full reality of the economic circumstances of people maybe hasn't hit home yet. I think there's big challenges ahead. And also, Seamus, small businesses. Many small businesses in rural areas don't necessarily pay rates. I mean, quite legitimately, it's the man in the van, it's the plumber, it's a bus driver, whatever, who owns his own bus. They can't access the grants that are in place around restarting. So, I mean, actually several times I've raised this with ministers, the fact that a small amount, not huge amounts, but small amounts of grant aid are needed. And I'll finish with this because I know people want to ask questions, but I talk to a lot of community groups who are trying to run community centres, and their bills keep mounting. Their insurance, maybe they're paying back a loan. Now they might have a short moratorium, but it's still mounting. Their utility bills, week on week, month on month. And they know that when they reopen, whatever small business they had there trying to make a few bob to keep the place going, whether it was anything from a language school to a creche to even, you know, renting out the hall for playing cards or Irish dancing classes or whatever, they know that, you know, it'll take a long time, certainly months, before that returns. So their income stream, they have nothing now, but they know that in 6 months' time, it still won't be back to where it was. So that's a big issue for volunteers taking on that responsibility. And I know Minister Ring has given out some grant aid and money, but that's to groups that are actually involved in projects around COVID. But for those who are not, they are left with this, you know, mounting wall of debt. And final, I know I said final a minute ago, but a big issue is the resumption of day services for adults with disabilities. The number of people who are in their homes, the person with disabilities themselves, and very often a slightly older parent or parents, since March 16th, behind a closed front door with no services. You know, it was difficult for lots of people, but when there's challenging behavior, it becomes especially so. And we see that there are proposed from the HSE cutbacks in services. A lot of people very concerned about that.
Thank you, Marion. There's a certain sense of humour floating around amidst all of this, and Michael, you'll appreciate this. Michael, it says, I'm enjoying your football. I've just passed the 30s. I'm a club footballer now, he says. Just past my 30s with aspirations to get on the county team. When do you think I'll get a chance to do that, Michael? And he wants you to give him a good answer.
Well, I'd say he should stick at it. You never know when your chance might come, but he might have missed the boat. That's the only thing at this stage. But but just some very issues raised there along the way. Anna was talking about a colleague who sadly took his own life. We were having a chat offline. My own dad actually died on the 16th of March, just at the start of this, and
that's right.
but he was 85, but he was fit and well and in good form. But I'll just share a little story to maybe lighten the mood. But I was going to play Galway one time in an All Ireland semi-final. I was only 19, and I was picked in the middle of the field, and we used to travel up on the day of the match. So I got up that morning and went to first mass with my father and came home. And my mother, there was no nutritionist that time, so whatever was in the fridge you got for the breakfast. And so we were having a bit of a fry or a bit of scrambled egg, whatever was going. And I wasn't feeling great. I was awful nervous. Galway were the All Ireland champions. It was 80 in 88. They were champions in 87. They won again in 88. But
Maura is smiling there, but go ahead.
Yeah, Maura is delighted about this one. But so anyway, I went out the back of the house for a few minutes and came back in, and my father was he was a Connemara man, and he was always on about Galway this and Galway that, but he was quiet spoken but very witty. So he had the paper up and he was reading the paper, and I was pushing the breakfast around the plate, and next thing he left down the paper and he said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Jesus, Dad," I said, I'm fierce nervous. I said, "This match, and I don't know, I'm not feeling well at all." And he said, "If I was you," he says, "I'd eat up out of that." He said, "There's no point being out in the middle of Crow Park making a fool of yourself and being hungry as well." So that was the psychology at that particular time. You're supposed to put your arm around, but just on the point, it was so strange. I suppose the whole funeral side of things and everything else, and people trying to accept all that end of things. And I think, as Marion says, they're small business. I have my own business as well, and I have to say, a couple of months ago, we have a little project management business, and it looked like we had a couple of jobs ready to go, gone. Maybe no sign of them starting up now. Things are a little bit brighter now, and maybe they will. But you're trying. You get this sort of fear around yourself. You're saying, "What am I going to do?" Like, we're after going through a recession, and 4 or 5 years at 8, 9, 10, 11, which was horrific for many people from many different ways. You get back on your feet, and I think that's a big thing. That there's going to be people of a certain vintage, and I'm not far off of myself now, that are going to say, "Geez, am I going to go through all this again to try to rebuild?" Like anyone that works for themselves, small, medium-sized business, it's tough going, and it's tough. You have responsibilities. Maybe you have employees. You have, and you have all those sort of expenditure that Marion talked about, their rates and insurances and everything else. Maybe rent, and you're sort of saying, "I can't go through this again." And it's been the backbone of Ireland. I think has been the sort of small and medium enterprises. And I think there's going to be a huge gap there. I just think it's going to be a few months before we actually realize where we're at. And I know we're trying to get businesses open, and next Monday is, I suppose, the flagship day in terms of that, with many businesses reopening. And just one thing I would say, and I'm going to hit this hard, please try to support. I know there's an online shopping, younger people who have been phenomenal through this. I know Marion talked about the older people response to maybe following the guidelines. I thought the response of our young people, I have 2 sons at home myself, 22 and 19. The way I think young people looked out for each other, the way they support each other, the way they accepted that we have to stay at home, we have to respect this virus, we have to look after our own families and relations has been immense. But they're getting back out there now as well. But I do really think that if we can support anybody at all in our locality, in our business, you know, and that few quid, that 350 payment, I think that should be extended where possible, because that money is floating around in the community. It means an awful lot. It might seem to some of the more wealthy people, you know, we've heard some of the comments from maybe big business people that it's not sustainable. Forget about maybe their millions and billions of profits for now, and think about the difference it makes. And that money, while some people didn't need it, maybe as badly as others, and while some people got paid, I think that's a good thing, because there's money floating around out there ready to be spent. And I've heard this. I was talking to one man yesterday locally who does paving stones and all that type of thing, and he has 930 orders or something. So lots of people doing up their houses that have a few quid, but there's people that don't. So anyway, they're just a few little issues that I think would be important, that we try to keep money locally and look after our own small businesses.
Interesting in that sense. Maura, there are people asking about will the third level sector return? Lots of people at home studying, etc., and wondering. And I mean, I think, Michael, thanks for those points. I think we have to get back to some of them. You really do document life on the ground. But Maura, lots of people wondering, especially one likely student in Galway, as it happens, done the Leaving Cert, not sure about how the marking system will work for her, but wondering if she does get to Galway, how do you see, what will it be like if, or will she have to study from home?
Yeah, it'll be very different, I think, for the likes of her if she's coming in as a first year. I think there will be definitely preference given to first years. Now, there's a lot of talk about what we're going to do, this idea of blended learning, and this idea that we will have some online, we will have some face-to-face. So at the moment, in a lot of the universities, what we're doing at the moment is we're putting our plans in place. We are looking at different mediums of actually teaching students online. We're looking at collaborative learning. We're looking at getting students, teaching them at the same times, keeping to timetables, keeping students motivated around that. I think there will be much more opportunities possibly for first years to get on campus, more so than second and third years. I think first year, and I always think this, that if you get a student through first year in college, the chances of them going through and finishing them are much higher. I think first year is that year that they really need that little bit of extra attention. Things are very different from them. Their home life has completely changed. They're gone out on their own. So they do need the support of the university, because they're not getting that constant support from home. So I think that in particular, so even at the moment, I think a lot of the student accommodation in Galway, I think, has already been taken up. So students are coming back to colleges, and colleges will be fully accommodating them. But I think for us as lecturers, we have to change. And we had to look at a lot of new mediums. And I suppose when we think of teaching in the universities, we think of undergraduate students, and sometimes we forget about postgraduate students as well. And we have a lot of postgraduate students who have been working right through and will work right through the summer. I have a PhD student of mine at the moment who's trying to finish, and I suppose it's been really difficult. We've been trying to kind of communicate with her online via emails. So it's a difficult time for people to be finishing a large amount of research work basically on their own or with just online support. So I suppose there's a huge, and as well as that, again, even for lecturing for us in the college, it's one part of our work, but the research is another part of our work. And we're hugely involved in research, and we're involved in European projects right across Europe. So again, our medium for collaborating and connecting with those has changed a lot as well. I know people would look at, I suppose, a lot of the research work and a lot of the traveling that we actually do. And I know, Seamus, you yourself do a lot of traveling back and forth to Brussels, and a lot of stuff that we have been able to do now online. But when you're dealing at the moment, we've got a project called Ruralisation, and we've got 18 partners right across Europe. And maybe to deal with all of those partners with numerous different languages, it can be really difficult. You don't get to the crux of what we're trying to do. So I suppose travel again for us will have to be important, whether we like that or not. As far as our national research as well that we would do, again, it has to change a lot. Seamus, you're involved as well in this. We run the National Rural Network project via Irish Rural Link and the Wheel and Philip Farley's group. And we in NUI Galway do a lot of the research for this. So again, our work on this has had to change. We've changed to mediums where we've done work with agriculture, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Rural and Community Development. Those have gone online quite successfully. Again, at the moment, we're involved in doing a video recording for women in Irish agriculture, which I have a great affinity with myself. And we've asked 5 or 6 women to record their own little clips and their own little videos for us. So again, we'll be launching this shortly. These are the kind of things that we've had to think about, do differently. Again, promoting these, again, you know, this is the type of work that we would do in the university as far as our research is concerned. And we've just had to think outside the box. Students will do this as well. There is nobody as adaptable as students. I do often think farmers and students to me are the most resilient and adaptable people that you can get. And so I really think students will adapt. They'll adapt very easily. I think they've got to get it into their thinking that we are all hoping this is not forever. This will not last. And we will come back to maybe a new normal, but we will come back to a form of normal. So students not to be concerned, like there's a huge amount of work behind the scenes going on that will be there to support them in September when they start. I think it's important for them to really consider the idea. I think this idea is floating at the moment of people saying, oh, I'm going to take a year out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I'm not sure what they can do. Going abroad is not an option at the moment. Continuing at home, I suppose, is an option. There's not too many part-time jobs for them at the moment either. I think, you know, take the bull by the horns, get involved in the university, get involved in the ITs if you're going to the IT, wherever you're going to go to college, get involved and you know, carry on and do it. The support system for the students will be there, and we will make sure they're taught as well as they ever have been.
Okay, thanks. I want to come back to you because there could be some positives too around working from home, etc., that we could look at, and will probably challenge the universities. Anna, you hinted, well, you touched on some tough subjects. You talked people's mental health. Marion talked about domestic violence, and I see lots of questions coming in from groups regarding community funding. Now, I know Pobal don't set the policy here, that's set by government, etc. But I mean, I would say on a personal level that Pobal have managed to keep the funding going very well and have been very flexible. How flexible can you be, and what are the difficulties you have in managing it from your perspective?
Well, just to state for the record, our priority is to make sure that there's a sustainable future for the community of Ireland, and the Department of Rural and Community Development, in fairness, Minister Ring is going to announce, I suppose, the outcome of the application process for the stability scheme for community and voluntary organisations. Marion referenced there quite rightly that, you know, some of those community agencies have had to close their doors. They have bills that they need to pay. Many of them might have lost their traded income because they're a local, you know, community shop and whatnot. So a €35 million fund was made available by government in recognition of that, and the outcome of that is going to be announced later this week by the department and by the minister. To my knowledge now, my most recent information, that we have 1,027 organisations nationally that have applied, that are eligible for that funding, and 50% of all community services programs have made an application for that. And I suppose what we're now looking at is the other 50% to ensure that we can, from the department's perspective, so that we can support the department in ensuring that, you know, they'll be ready to open their doors and able to open their doors when the pandemic in its current crisis is subsided, as we reopen society and as we reopen Ireland. Because as Marion has rightly said, you know, it is the kernel of Ireland, you know, community of Ireland, rural Ireland, and ensuring the sustainability of that community centre is really important. So from an organisational perspective, from a public perspective, it's really important. But equally, I think it's very important that the message is heard, that it's been heard at government level, and that government commitment around that 35 million to support those community entities at a time, community and voluntary organisations that are experiencing those cash flow difficulties regarding, you know, keeping the lights on, and paying the rents and that. Yeah,
okay.
that's what I would say.
Marion, Simon Harris said this morning that we really won't have the normality we used to have, or at least that's what he was suggesting. Aileen McLaughlin is a regular viewer of our webinar. She says, I live in Leitrim and I wore a face mask and they're still looking at me. But it's a more serious question in the sense that we really do need to get back to some kind of business as usual. You know, Simon is saying perhaps not as usual, but if wearing a mask is the price we pay, and if other, you know, how do we manage to get back? Because we just can't continue in this kind of another person come in with, I feel like I've been living in a monastery for the last 3 months. So, you know, so when are we going to get back to normal, do you think? And will government policy be something we can look for hope in this one?
Well, I suppose two questions there. When are we going to get back to normal? And mask wearing may become part of the normal. I have to say, Seamus, that 1 week I'm listening to Luke O'Neill or some of the other epidemiologists, and they're telling us that we could have some kind of treatments by September, maybe even some vaccines coming on stream. And you're really optimistic. And then, you know, the next week it begins to dawn on you that this is not going to be something that will be solved quickly. We can't even guarantee that there will be a vaccine, but given that literally the whole world is working on it, and there's well over 100, I can't give you the exact figure, it could even be over 150 serious efforts by companies and universities and all of that to try and find a vaccine, and then a lot of research on trying to find some kind of treatments. So I think all of that can give us hope that this isn't just a tunnel with very little light at the end of it, that we're not just walking along in the darkness. But having said that, we are in that tunnel. And I'm happy to say that it must be 6 to 8 weeks ago when I asked Leo Varadkar on several occasions, actually, on different Wednesdays or Thursdays, if he would consider making face masks mandatory on public transport. I also suggested that he might follow example in other countries by sending out a number of free face masks to people. I referenced all of the different community voluntary groups that are making face masks, that have helped to supply their local nursing homes and elsewhere, and that even just to give some public information about how somebody can make a face mask. And I do think that they should be available on public transport. I think they should be mandatory on public transport. But Seamus, we all know you could be rushing in the morning, you could forget your face mask. So some possibility that initially at least they would be available. Because, you know, I was reading actually a tweet last night, and I asked the question, is this right? It was a tweet from RTE where they listed out the 10 things that you can do to help make you safe. And I thought it was very straightforward and very simple. But one of the things that they mentioned was that wearing a face mask can cut your risk by 99%. Now, to me, that figure is really high and doesn't seem to indicate, you know, what I was hearing, because definitely there were mixed messages, and I met significant resistance from the Taoiseach, and anybody can go and check the record several times, because there was all the talk about wearing them in healthcare settings, but not elsewhere. And your colleague from Leitrim who rang, believe it or not, I was in Carrick-on-Shannon there recently, and I was in a shop, and when I came out, I lifted the phone and I rang somebody and I said, would you believe that about 1 in every 3 people were wearing a face mask? And this was a fairly big store. And I was really pleased about that and delighted, because, Seamus, I think apart from anything else, when you wear a face mask, it's a physical barrier. I think it makes you more aware of the fact that you need to stand back a little bit. It creates that sort of awareness that's slightly seeping away, because, you know, we're down to 5 new cases, thankfully. But we also know that this is not the end. We're still in that tunnel, and any assistance that we can to help, you know, that journey, I think is important. And to me, face masks is an absolutely essential element of getting through it.
Quick question, Marion. Will we have a government by the weekend?
Personally, I think we will. And I've thought that for a while now, but that's instinct to some extent. I have no insight into the mind of the Green Party, but I would know a number of the TDs, the senators, and the sense I'm getting. Now, these people would be pro the agreement, but still they tell me they know their members. And while it might be tight, I still think they will carry it. To be honest with you, after I read the programme for government, I rang up Malcolm Noonan, actually. Some of you know Malcolm.
Green Party.
And I said, Malcolm, congratulations, you've stitched it in. Those were my exact words, because they have in the language. Obviously, there's the implementation, but, you know, it's here. I don't think that they would ever be able to stitch it in again in the same way. But my view is we will have a government on and Taoiseach on Saturday.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's you putting your prediction format out there. So thank you, Michael. Again, lots of questions coming in at Jay. I suppose Pat Kennedy talks about managing the communities from the bottom or from the top. You're somewhere as county chairman in the middle, maybe that's the best way to put it. But one question that I like is, when will the first club match be held, in your opinion?
Well, the dates were brought back for the 17th of July, the weekend of the 17th of July. Now, we're not going with that weekend in Offaly. We're going the following weekend. We're just giving the clubs a little bit more of a chance to get back training and get up and running. But from the 24th, from the 17th of July on until the 14th of October, the counties are supposed to be, county matches, I think the 14th of October that weekend, or 15th. So fairly shortly, and I suppose there's a lot of challenges around that. But, you know, I think it's all with the risks attached, what a massively positive few days for the GAA in terms of the pitches reopening. I think particularly our young people getting back out training, that's from this Saturday. Our adult teams are back from last night. You know, so there's, I suppose, the challenges that face clubs, many rural clubs especially, to get their protocols in place, their signage, their hand sanitizers, their equipment. Dressing rooms are still closed. You have to turn up togged out. So there's a huge lot of protocol around it. But the excitement is just palpable. And, you know, it was interesting to see the GAA, how it operated during the lockdown. So we talked about the sort of voluntary response, which was massive across the country. And, you know, in Offaly, I think we had every parish involved and leading the charge. But another thing that got hugely involved in was fundraising for charities, because being mindful, I suppose, of all the groups doing good work. Like the Offaly Hurlers had a virtual talking, and you were talking, Maura was talking about, I suppose, about webinars and everything like that. We did a virtual show, a variety show, which was like, we had lads dressed up as Tina Turner, and one of my own lads, I think, was Beyonce and all this type of stuff.
Wow.
It was great crack. But on a Saturday evening between 7:30 and 10:30, they put on a show, and they raised well over 60 grand for Offaly Down Syndrome and Jigsaw, which is a mental health youth support in Tullamore, 2 local charities. But there was loads of other stuff. Eddie Buggy, a local lad here, had a cycle last weekend for the hospice. He raised over 30 grand. It's just incredible. I'd actually be amazed. I saw Kildare GA put up something last week where they reckoned about $250,000 was raised in Kildare alone by through GA clubs. But I'd be interested to see what that figure is across the country. And I'm making that point as well about the 40 million that the government are making available now to the RFU, the FAI and the GA, because, you know, I think the work that was done warrants that sort of support now when it's badly needed. but look at, we're looking forward to getting going, and there is I don't want to get into the negative end. There are questions. We are in this tunnel. We're coming out of it, but we have to tread carefully, and it is only a protocol to get us back playing. But really looking forward to it. And one other little thing that just I picked up on there was, I just think in terms of our Zoom meetings and our webinars, they've been brilliant and they fill the gap. But you have to be careful of your social interaction that we're talking about. A lot of the meetings that we have, particularly in the GEA, you probably don't need to have half of them, to be totally honest with you, but it gets people, you know, if it's a committee meeting on a Monday night in the club or whatever it is, it's getting people out, they're meeting up, and that social interaction is so important. That's the thing that came out really strongly to me over the last couple of months, is the level of loneliness that's out there. Like we're not going to get into the rural pub, which is on its last legs, you know, and the drink driving, which is not acceptable, and we're not getting into all that, but we have had all these arguments over the last number of years of, you know, the man living at home or a woman living at home on their own with maybe, and they've been identified. Those people now have been identified through this process, through the community champion process, that we know who they are now. So there's really no excuse to leave those people on their own in the future. We have to make sure that whatever way it is, if it's only a cup of tea or someone calling or whatever it is, or a phone call, and you know, I'd have people ringing me now that I knew reasonably well, but I found out a lot more about them over the last couple of months. So I think it's that minute detail in rural Ireland which is very, very important. Or not maybe in rural Ireland, I think maybe even in built up Ireland as well. So look, a lot of things going on, but we have to be very careful. I think final point, that we don't go back to our old ways, because our old ways weren't working in a lot of cases. They weren't the right thing to do. And great if people can come and work from home. I think that drain of killing ourselves driving up and down to Dublin from all over the country, that 2 hours up, 2 hours home, and now the waste of time and energy, and it doesn't leave you that. I think the reason a lot of people got involved in the volunteerism, because they've more energy, they've more time that they don't have because of that grind of a daily commute. So all those issues, I think, really have to be considered. And I think, as I said very early this morning, was I think an awful lot of good can come out of this through a horrific time if we don't just roll back into the old ways.
Thanks, Michael. Pat Benson is getting annoyed with me. I'm not answering his question, but Pat seemingly got €36, or was it 35 back from the insurance. That's a positive, so well done, Pat. But you do make some interesting points in all your questions. For example, you talk about the HSE being mandated to provide necessary medical nursing and home help support to people in locations. And I suppose we're talking about people wanting to remain at home. Maura, going in your wider field of rural development, we're always saying, I know at Irish Rural Link, and I know you are saying, that we have to create jobs outside of the main cities. And Michael is kind of averring to some of the advantages of cutting down the traffic and the emissions if you could create jobs locally. And I know NUIG have been doing a lot of work in this area as well. So, you know, is it, first of all, we know older people want to live at home, and that creates a care market if you want to be driven commercially about it. But there are other industries who might think about it as well. So Maura, will we take this seriously after this?
Yeah. I think one of the most unbelievable things about COVID-19 has been this idea. It's been not just a national, the biggest social experiment and economic experiment I think that we'll ever have in our lifetimes ever, and an international and a national. And I think things have been put forward and have been seen now that maybe we've had people promoting for many years, but they've never actually had the platform in order to experiment this. And I think we've seen now what can actually happen. We've seen the way governments can front load funding for particular things. I think Marion mentioned disabilities earlier on, there, you know, homelessness, you know, to see at some stages right throughout this idea that we didn't have homelessness in this country, something that we're battling with for many times. So there are answers to these. Some of the things that have been happening in rural Ireland over the last number of years, again, people talk about remote working, and we have a fantastic group, James, you had them on this a few weeks ago, and this idea of remote working. Again, this idea that you can actually let people go home and expect them to work. We have a great advantage in the universities that we are and can and are allowed to work from home. And I suppose I do often even listen to my mother saying to me, you know, do you have to work again? Do you have to work again? And I do always say, ma'am, there's nobody else to do the work for me. That's an awful lot of the situation with an awful lot of people. There's nobody to do people's work for them. So whether they're at home or whether they're at work, they have to do the work and they'll get it done. So I think in that sense, showing that people can actually do this work remotely. Now, we've also had this idea in the last couple of years, we've had this thinking in and around digital hubs in rural areas. People would come to me and they'd go, oh, I'm not sure if they'll work in our area, I'm not sure. Now that we've had this experiment of people working at home, some people do honestly believe it works 100% for them. Some people don't believe. But definitely, as Michael said a minute ago, people do want to work and live in a local rural area. I don't want to commute an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and a half every single day to Galway and back and forth. That's the time that I used to give to my community that I can no longer give. If I can work in a digital hub in a local rural area and do my work there, I still have the social contact that is needed to work in a working environment, but you're working in a local area. So funding this idea of digital hubs and local hubs in rural areas has become much more of a reality. But Seamus, and again, I think people have mentioned the broadband. I have many, many issues with broadband myself, and it becomes hugely difficult. We have such an innovative population here in Ireland, in rural Ireland. And again, mentioning the small businesses, the way small businesses have come forward now, thought of new ideas, new ways of working things, new ways of thinking. Again, making sure that we have broadband as an infrastructure to prop that up in rural Ireland is absolutely essential. One of the other things, Seamus, that we really have to consider, and I suppose we do this all of the time in the university, we talk to the students afterwards, we evaluate the students. One of the biggest issues that students have is transport. Transport in and out of rural Ireland is a huge issue. At the moment, a lot of transport, maybe outside of, or maybe local link, a lot of transport is provided by private transporters. If their transport is cut, maybe on one particular bus is cut by 50%, if that happens in an urban centre, that's not a huge difficulty because there's another bus coming in 20 minutes time. You get a bus out of a small village in rural Ireland at 7:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning. You won't get one again for the rest of that day, or you maybe get one or two more. So I suppose issues that we had pre-COVID in rural Ireland about broadband, about transport, about all of these things, they haven't gone away, they're all still there. And actually they're even more compounded now by our results of COVID than they ever had before. So issues that we have really need to be dealt with, but they can be dealt with. And we've seen by front-loading funding that these things can be dealt with, and very successfully.
That's excellent. And Anna, there's a question from Patricia Cassidy, and I see Teresa Butler has questions on volunteerism. Teresa Hooks asks about a burning soul, in other words, a driven leader in a community. Lots of people are worrying. Can you say from Pobal's perspective, is there pressure to cut back on funding? Because a lot of people are worried about that. And can you give reassurance?
Well, firstly, I can assure you from speaking to the Department of Rural and Community Development and the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, it's actually quite the reverse. You know, I saw one of the participants is asking questions, for example, about SICAP, you know, the Social Inclusion and Community Activation Programme that run by the Department of Rural and Community Development that Pobal administers. And the importance of that now, you know, if you look at the profile of unemployment that's, you know, most recently published by the CSO, you know, young people of Ireland are the people that have been most impacted. You know, people under the age of 25, 52% unemployment, that was reported just recently in the CSO. So from a SICAP perspective, from that programme perspective, what additional interventions need to be put in place to support those young people back into a workplace as soon as possible, you know, so that we can reinvest in our economy and keep things moving and keep things going forward. So certainly what we're hearing from Europe as well is a massive investment, and obviously the programme for government, and Marion has referenced it there, is certainly looking at, you know, combating poverty and renewing efforts around social inclusion and community development, and a particular focus on rural Ireland policy. So I think we can take all of those as very positive signs from the Programme for Government perspective, but equally from the Department of Rural and Community Development, like their absolute commitment to the social inclusion community activation programme, the fact that they have, you know, provided funding to keep the services lights on and ready to have their doors open when, as society reopens, to me demonstrates a commitment to ensuring that, you know, community is at the heart of Ireland and at the heart of government from a funding perspective. So just to assure everybody that we've heard no signs, unless Marion knows differently, that the shears are being taken out to prune those. I think I think there's evidence quite to the contrary.
I'm going to do a very quick roundup of, you know, final thoughts. I'm just going to note Brian Smith, a regular attendee at these webinars. You've spent 6 years on the board of Down syndrome. So I hope Anna's question is as of help to you, because you're worried also about will funding be reduced. And I think, you know, Michael, you've talked about people with disabilities, etc. So we need not to forget that. So Marion, in literally about a minute and a half, what's your, let's call it positive advice to people listening in here in the communities? What would you say to them to cheer them up, if nothing else?
You're as bad as the European Parliament. You get 1 minute to make your point.
I know, I know.
Look, what's my positive advice? Do you know something? I think Michael Dykeman said something that's really important. I think it was Michael. He talked about shop local. And that might seem very simple. It might seem like a nothing, but it's hugely important. Because I know somebody who works in the courier business, and they were so busy during the initial and still phases of the lockdown. And a lot of it was coming from abroad. So if people would shop local, and those businesses, the local businesses, would try to increase their online presence. There are grants and loans and assistance for businesses to do that. Because what I'm really afraid of, and again, Michael mentioned Burr, I know it, I canvassed it, and lots of towns like that. I would be very concerned that the centres of those towns now will be hollowed out. So I think that's something that every person listening today, this isn't for one sector or for another sector. It's something that I personally can do, whatever it is, to try to shop local and also to try to buy Irish. As I said, it's a simple solution, but it can make a huge difference, and it'll make a huge difference to your community, because you'll have your smaller shops, hopefully, you'll have your small services. I mean, even something as simple as dog grooming. I remember on the canvas in Drumshanbo, I never expected to see a dog groomer in Drumshanbo, but there she was. But, you know, will she be there when it's over? And when a door closes, it's really hard to reopen it sometimes. So whether it's your local markets, your local dog groomers, your small supermarkets, or your shops, your clothes shops, whatever, look around your own place, your own area, and see how, from an economic perspective, you can contribute. And that's at least one piece of the jigsaw. And let me tell you, Shems, there's a lot of pieces to this jigsaw.
Good, and I'm thankful you're in Dáil Éireann, because your passion is certainly as good as it ever was. Michael, you don't even have a minute, but try it anyway. What's your quick advice and a positive note?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that dog groomer, any groomer myself, Monday morning. This hair is going. That's the first.
Yeah, I know.
That's the first thing. And I don't know if I can find a €9 packet of peanuts anywhere, maybe to have a pint, but I think I'll keep away from that for a while. Look, I have to say, Shems, it's been Sinead Dooley, your deputy CEO, rang me maybe 3 months ago about getting involved in the community project, the Community Champions project, and it's just been brilliant. Not so much anything that I did, but just to see the way when we mobilise the people, the positivity, what's happened on the ground. I'd have to say I'm disappointed that the programme is ending this month. My colleagues around the country that I've got to know that are involved, so like there's so many different aspects. I'm only the way we did it in Offaly is one way. It was done 32 or 26, I don't know, 30 different ways around the country, and all the brilliant people that were working on it. But I think, look, we will continue in our roles for the next while, because we want to make sure that this handover that I talked about earlier happens. But look, let's hope that we get back out there, that people stay healthy. And, you know, I don't think there's going to be another lockdown if there's another wave. So I think we have to prepare ourselves to live differently, and all those things we discussed this morning. But look, and I have to say, like, even again this morning, this is an area of life that I wouldn't have been involved in, you know, these types of discussions, and what I've learned personally, I think will be a huge help to me in my general day-to-day life going forward. So look, thanks, mate.
Your colleague in Meath, Patricia Cassidy, would say the same, and it's a pity that the County Champions programme ended as quickly as it did, and we're slightly fearful that still, with all the community talk, the first thing they took was this programme, which was really valuable. So that's well made. Maura, the positive quick minute. It's getting down to 10 seconds now, but go on.
Very quickly, I think just carrying on a little bit on the volunteerism, I think people who had not previously been involved in volunteerism and started to become involved in it because of COVID, please continue. I think that's, you know, there's plenty of avenues in rural Ireland still, even though the County Champions, which has been an unbelievable model of support in rural Ireland, is not continuing. Volunteerism in every part of rural Ireland is still available for anybody who wants to get involved in it. I think from a more innovative point of view, from the point of view of getting people in enterprise, let it be social enterprise, let it be individual economic enterprise, let it be our farming community, let it be our young people that we need to keep in rural Ireland. Any of this can happen. It's hugely possible within rural Ireland. You know, we need a good transport system and we need a good broadband system. And I think if we have that, the innovation is within people within rural Ireland. They will make it happen. If the infrastructure is around them and built around them and strengthened around them, they can do anything. So we just need the additional assistance in that infrastructure, and we will keep rural Ireland well and truly open.
Thank you, Maura. Anna, final word from you.
Final word for me is what we see all around the place, #BeKind. You know, support your local, volunteer local, shop local, support each other, look after well-being, embrace diversity. You know, the fabric of Ireland has changed irrevocably over the last 20 years. And be kind, to me, would be the central of it all. Accept everything, accept everyone, and support those that are not as advantaged as you might be, and don't assume that every disability is visible. You know, so be kind would be my words. Yeah.
So indeed, be kind, shop local, keep the volunteering going. I think those are the messages coming from you this morning. Firstly, a hearty thanks to our guests, Maura Farrell, Michael Dignan, Anna Shakespeare, Marion Harkin. It's been absolutely uplifting. One comment says, delighted I tuned in this morning. This was a heartening discussion and I feel a lot better for doing so. So I'm glad for you, and I'm glad for all of you who tuned in. I'm sorry we didn't get all your questions, but they will be looked at and considered later on. I know next week we'll continue the program. Hopefully, if you enjoyed it this morning, it'll be about well-being. We have Sean Moynihan from Alone and Deirdre Waldron from Social Services, and maybe a couple of surprise guests as well. To you guests who came on board this morning, sincere thank you. You gave up an hour of your time, which is to be lauded. To you who joined in and registered, we thank you sincerely. And look, if you are a member of Irish Rural Link, we're delighted. If you're thinking of it, we'll be even more delighted. So until next week at 10 o'clock, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you, Seamus.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sean.